Hello and welcome to the Varietal show on my snazzy new computer, as people in the chat have pointed out, which I'll talk about a little bit about later. This show is about playing solo tabletop RPGs and using them to write a bit of a story. If you're not watching this live, down in the description below there will be timestamps. You can click on whatever interests you the most. And if you are here live, obviously you can't skip ahead, but what you can do is, let's realize something here. There we go. What you can do is join in the live chat, which is this way, where there's already a crop of potatoes growing. If I seem a little discombobulated, I am. As a part of the new computer, I had to swap around some of my, at this point, multi-year ingrained habits of where things are. So it'll take me a bit to adjust. Anyhow. Hello, Genera, Jumpstore, Witchery. I feel like I'm still coming in a little hot on the audio, so I'm going to knock it down a bit. Also, I feel like the music's too hot, and I've been right the last few times about that, so. And Witchery, yes, Witchery. We saw you briefly last week, but you said you were busy, and so it's good to see you back this week. And, of course, Jumpstore, GS, and we know that Tammy's out there recovering. It's good to have you, Tammy, even if you can't. Type in the chat. All right. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what game we're playing tonight. And when I have told you what game we're playing, it will take me almost no time at all to explain, because it's super... it's a super light rules kind of game. And when we're done with that... then we'll play. Sorry, I just realized I didn't bring my dice box, but I'm not going to go get it just yet. This part of the show is called litgames. It stands for literature games, and it is the show, really. It is the part of the show where we... it is the part of the show where we play a game, usually solo tabletop RPGs, indie-itch.io kind of stuff. And then we use that as prompts to write a story together, interpreting the prompts through with the live chat and my own filter, and create a story. And the story that the thing that we're going to be basing our story on tonight is called The Good Christmas Tree. The Good Christmas... I can get a little bigger there. The Good Christmas Tree belongs to a category of games... that I guess you could call micro RPGs. They are the size of a business card, and that's going to make the rules really easy to explain. To play this, you just need a coin. I'm going to use my, of course, Metroid coin for those who haven't seen it before. And basically, you need a D6, which I'll have to awkwardly jump up and get in a minute. And all the premise is that we have a Christmas tree, but we don't have decorations for it. It's Christmas Eve. And so in order to decorate that Christmas tree, we have to go and run out into a snowy forest and ask someone. And then basically what you do is you roll a d6. That'll determine the category of who you're asking: woodland creatures, wolf, whatever else. And roughly the things they deal in. And then you flip a coin. And on heads, they have what you need, which I'm going to call the blue side here. The save the animal side of my Metroid coin. And on tails, we will say that they don't have quite what we need, but they need us to complete something. And that's the only direction we get. So it'll be up to us, and by us I mean me and chat, to sort of interpret what our challenges are and how to overcome them. And Jumpstore says, what makes the Christmas tree good? Well, I guess us. Yeah. So for example, you see how there's gnomes, fairies, wolves, dwarves, elves, and so on. And that's it. That's the whole game. You roll a d6, you flip a coin, you decide who you're talking to, and then we'll write a little bit about it. And maybe for once, I'll actually finish this thing. Finish a game because it's so short. Unfortunately, I'll have to be right back because I realize I have forgotten my dice. So I don't know. Enjoy the music. All right. Jumpstore says I'm jinxing myself already. I was born jinxed. I have a few colors of dice here. I'll just see what one colors people like. Uncle Kitty says at least we won't have to worry about the computer going boom. Indeed. I think maybe that's why it cut early last stream too. Hey chat. Should we go with the bluish purple dice? It's more blue than purple. I don't know if that's coming through under these colored lights. Should we go with the classic green? Let's call it Christmas green. Purple. Or yellow. So classic green, Christmas green, blue, purple, or yellow. Jumpstore says, in Germany, they'd light actual candles in the Christmas tree, and I don't understand how their houses didn't burn down. Well, they did, I think is the answer to that. And also, guess what? Everyone's favorite recurring bit has returned. Zevia. Evocative of flavor, without the burden of having it. I'm seeing lots of votes for purple. Which is kind of what I expected. Purple's an extremely popular color. Alright, let's not get too distracted by the computer, Rory. Let's play a little bit of the game, and then when we get chatting, I'll tell you what happened with the computer. Okay, I think the winner is purple. Yeah, honestly, well, I don't think the color or the quality of light you get from LED is quite as nice as traditional incandescent. And I think for people who didn't live in a time where that was the only choice, there's a romanticism for that. But as someone who did live through the era of that being our only choice, they're terrible. And I don't miss them for that. Like, it's nice when I encounter them and I don't have to deal with them. Jumpstore says regular Shakespearean insult, Rory. I don't even remember what I said. But what's new about that? Alright, I rolled a 2. Uncle Kitty said, my life is a fairy tale, but unfortunately the author is German. And by the way, if people are hearing a bit of fan in the background, unfortunately that's the tower. I've gotten it as far away as I can for the kind of things I have to connect to it, but it does just slightly pick up in the background if you have good headphones. Yeah, Witchery says, the incandescent bulbs were pretty, but they're such a faff. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. GS says, Rory, you have a strand on your left side. You mean the strand of lights? Yeah. Every year we go through them and play which overly expensive bulb is broken. Yeah. You know what my one memory of that I have is, I don't know if this is a thing the world over, but they used to be made for trees. This is going to be one weird description. You either know it or you don't. It looks like a candlestick, but the whole thing is sort of a long traditional style incandescent mini bulb, just long, and it's couched in a red capped plastic with a green capped plastic with a red bowl, and its gimmick is that it has a low boil point, or at least under pressure or whatever it is going on with it, liquid in that long thing. It's not the actual light, and the light itself heats it up and it bubbles. And it was my favorite thing on my grandparents rather, Christmas tree when I was a kid to watch. And then I found it in a store, a sort of plug into the wall bed light style one, and that's my favorite decoration. And when we actually get to the point where all my decorations are up, which aren't yet because I've had other priorities this year so far, it will actually be right down here, out of sight, but yeah. Okay. So, 2, woodland creatures know the forest floor, all its plants and berries. So you venture to find decorations to make yourself festive in hopes to bring joy to the children. I don't know who the children would be, and they don't have to be here. Instead, whoops. The one thing that I couldn't get with the money I was able to borrow was a good keyboard. Unfortunately, and this keyboard is your classic. If you've ever worked in an office, you've probably worked with the Logitech average keyboard, no wrist rest or anything. So I keep like mistyping on this thing and such because it's not very well made. So we're all gonna struggle a bit watching me type on this. Unfortunately, when it comes to like getting spare parts off friends, I can definitely get them off of friends. I have friends who are very generous for a lot of stuff, gave me a lot of like peripherals they're not using anymore and so on. And I hope to be able to repay them at some point. But the problem is they're all gamers, and gamer keyboards are not good for writing on. A Christmas tree, a good Christmas. Okay. Let's just start in, if you have any ideas about the name or nature of the character who's going to wander through a snowy forest looking for random stuff in a forest to decorate their tree with, throw your ideas in chat. I'm going to start writing about a snowy Christmas night where I realize that my tree needs decorating, and then hope ideas come to me. Gianera says I use one every day at work. Yeah, I used to. Yeah, you're going to hear more clickety-clack. Jumpstore says one of my favorite anime series, Mononoke. Not the movie, I assume. That's spelled differently. Ended up getting a Netflix movie that was released today, but I've been too busy to watch it, so I'm going to wait till tomorrow, but I'm excited. Well, thank you for choosing me over the movie. I wouldn't have been insulted if you didn't go elsewhere. Witchery says Klaus. Oh, I loved Klaus. The designer of a lot of that stuff, my partner worked with him on another show. He's a really nice Frenchman. Oh yes, Witchery says no, like all the gamer cue, the mechanical because they must make noise. Yeah, but also like they're good if you're directing to not have false inputs, like it requires deliberate inputs. But when you're typing a book, they're too high profile. There's too much resistance, whatever else. For typing, it's kind of unintuitive, but you need lower profile, whatever else. It's a beautiful movie. Yes, it is. I don't think it's a flawless movie, but what Christmas movie is, honestly? Well, Muppets Christmas Carol is. I'm not opening this to discussion. It was the time. The dusk turned the snow blue. Which are you saying you want to call him Klaus? Was that what that was about, or were we just referencing the movie? Does anyone have a name they want to use? Witcher says I'm using my Apple keyboard, which people do have opinions about. Yeah, but it's like people who have opinions about kitchen knives, right? Like, there is a point at which you can make a utility argument on a kitchen knife. But it's mostly about, does it fit your hand, right? And what you do. Okay. Close it is. Jump Store, my office that I used to work in, I mentioned before, it was 100% Jewish woman, but they wanted to set up Christmas trees for like clients in November and stuff to feel like we were a homey place or whatever else. And I discovered there that they knew absolutely nothing about decorating a tree, which I guess makes sense, but I just had never really considered that there would be that much of a void. Are you in that camp? Or have you had the opportunity to do some tree decorating? Can it be used to down a bear? Well, that's less of a problem around here. The dusk turned the snow blue to Klaus's eyes. Up. No, it's so short enough. A mournful. Boy, that is so loud. There's nothing I can do, guys. You're just gonna have to either hear the clickety clacks. Uncle Kitty says there are no bears near you. There are sort of, not really near me. So like, Canada is scabs of intense suburbs with little else. I mean, we get trees and stuff, but not enough to sustain a bear. And unless you happen to live near one of the national parks, of which we have many, but in those dense suburbs, not so much, then you don't really see them. Witcher says, I believe Rory's in and around it. Yeah, Vancouver is as specific as I'm ever going to get, but I'm in a suburb-heavy place. Okay. Jumpstore says, my family on my dad's side isn't Jewish, so when I go over to my aunt's house, she'd always let my brother and decorate the tree with her cousins. Okay, that's good. I wanted to make sure I wasn't alienating you too much with this game. The dusk turned the snow blue to Klaus's eyes. A mournful color for such a happy scene. Uncle Kitty says, you worry more about the trash pandas than the bear. In Vancouver proper, definitely. You get raccoons. We do get raccoons around here. Less so. We're actually pretty close to some water here. So, yeah. Witcher says, well, I only mention it because bears are less likely to be Vancouverites. It kind of depends, but yeah. In general, yeah. I used to live in a place that's near a very large national park, and you would see them occasionally around there. We get a lot of skunks. Yeah, we get skunks and coyotes. You can hear them yipping at night. Not as much as a place like California does or something, but we do get them. Nothing like wolves or cougars or anything like that. I think skunks are adorable, by the way. I think most animals are cute. I even like rats. I know that there's a reputation that they have, and I guess it's earned, but I like rats. I think they're very sweet. Jumpstart says, Rory Copernicus discovered that I am not the center of the universe. It's a tough pill to swallow, but after 30 years, I finally accepted his scientific findings. What a jerk, eh? Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Witchery. They are sweet little things. The irony is, though, they are... GS says we have no foxes here. The irony is if they didn't use stink as defense, I don't think they'd be as sweet, right? They don't have to be violent. That's why. Yeah, no foxes here. The dust turned the snow blue. And guys, you guys think I'm getting distracted. I was more actually just thinking through some things in the background of my head of what I wanted to do next. Jumpstart calls rats pocket puppies. Great name. Oh, wow. I didn't know that skunks tore apart nests. Good call, Uncle Kitty. Stay indoors. The dust turned the snow blue to Klaus's eyes, a mournful color for such a happy scene. It was Christmas Eve. And tomorrow, if the weather stayed reasonable. Oof. Oof. Children would be shuttled up to his cabin door for celebrations. A rescue I follow had one called Lollipop. Aw, she was a beautiful lady. Destinkified. That's a great name. He was about. Uncle Kitty says he knew someone with one that had about 15 to 20 pounds. I didn't know they got that big. Yeah, so tomorrow the shuttled up. However, the blue of the dusk snow was not entirely inappropriate. For in his flurry of preparation, hunting and splitting logs. Well, let's not just say it's those two. Klaus had forgotten to buy decorations for the tree. Most importantly, Jumpstore says, I knew this kid from school who had a pet skunk. He named Lord Have Mercy because the skunk was wild and could and would spray you on a whim. That's hilarious. Uncle Kitty says skunks are like alternative cats, but the claws aren't retractable. Yeah, one thing I've noticed about a cat, I feel like they're not fully domesticated. I'm not sure that they could be. Like they feel like they're most of the way there. But when I compare it to my experience of owning a dog, they're still kind of wild. They're just so small that it doesn't matter so much. I guess also a lot of people kept them as pest control, semi-feral or fully feral in their, in their barns and stuff. So maybe that DNA has just lasted longer. But yeah, they never feel fully domesticated to me. Klaus had forgotten to buy decorations for the cabin. Witchery says they self-domesticated. Yeah, that's true. So not as much as ones we train. That's a good point. I didn't think of that. Barn cats are still a thing. Indeed they are, yeah. I mean, it's still a viable way to live, really. Uncle Kitty says dogs are for people who want to be worshipped as gods. Cats are for people who can deal with gods sitting on their chest at 3 a.m. demanding a sacrifice. Most importantly, he had a fine, plump pine tree standing bare in the center of the room. What sort of Christmas morning, he thought to himself, oops, involves opening gifts under an undecorated tree. Yet, it was late. Janera says, I'm currently serving my tiny goddess as a chair. Aww. There was no store to bring gifts. Gifts? What am I talking about? There were no stores open. Oh my god. How much can I blame on the reversal of my layout? I'm blaming it all for like one day. Klaus was ready to surrender to his own mistake and call it a night. Then he remembered a thing his old man told him. None know whimsy like the good folk of the forest. It was a peculiar event for him to catch any of the Fey folks out and about, but on that day, so close to the solstice, the walls between things were thin. He figured there would be no great loss to wander out into the snow. And try to petition the Fey folk for decorations on his doll tree. He bound himself so loud. Clack, 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 clack. It's like a chill stream, but outside the window. There's a hailstorm on a tin roof. Well, I'll get used to it, but I knew it was going to pick up. I'm just surprised it picks up as much as it does. Witchery says Klaus is playing with Fey Fire. I guess we'll see. Jumpstore says technically bonobos are our closest relative. I think I've heard that, yeah. Yes, but they're all our cousins. GAS says it's soothing. I guess I'll have to take your word for it. He bound himself up into sheepskin and wool. Then tread a trail in the knee-high drift. That was building against his door. Trail through. Witcher says, I didn't really notice, but I'm not wearing headphones. Oh, good. Jumpstore says it adds to the atmosphere you built up. Well, that's very kind of you to say, Jumpstore. A lot of thought did go into the atmosphere. Okay. We're talking about fighting tigers? Did I miss something? Oh, Uncle Kitty said, it always amazes me when they do those internet polls about could you take a blank in a fight, usually an animal. There are people who say yes to anything bigger than a rat. Yeah. Oh, apparently tiger boxing is a real thing. Ugh. Yeah. I'm with you, Jumpstore. I'm a fan of consent, and animals can't consent to fighting. Could you take an animal in a fist fight? I feel like it's people that don't really own animals, because inevitably an animal wants it more, right? Like, if nothing else, an animal wants it more. Also, I think they just underestimate how strong most things are. I think it's because there's a lot of reasons. Some of it is just not being very self-aware, but I think some people just don't understand why humans are apex predators and assume it means that we must have known something, right? Like we must be good at something, like being strong or whatever else, but we're not. We're weak. We only live without additional implements in a very narrow band of the planet. We can't last long without water at all, which is also not super common in the narrow band of the planet we can live with unprotected by other animals' skins. We aren't good at, we're not fast. We don't have fangs. We don't have claws. We don't have thick skin, although it's tougher than you would think, but no. But yes, Uncle Kitty points it out. We have tools and we have tremendous ability to work as a pack. So like if you take away those things, humans die. That's why excommunication was such a big deal. That's why things like, not to sort of take away the poetic nature of it, but that's why things like heartbreak hurt. Because pain is meant to attract your attention to things that threaten your survival. And if you are being excluded in a tribal setting way back in the 50,000 years ago, if you had indications you were going to get excommunicated or kicked out of the tribe, that's a death sentence. You don't make it, right? So the ones who had that sense, felt that pain, and then responded to it were the ones that come back. But I mean, it hangs around now as like social anxiety and heartbreak and whatever else. But we are fundamentally social creatures. Any concept that we can live on our own is born of delusions about what that even means. All right. So I rolled a 2. And a 2 is gnomes familiar with the elements. I know I said 3 and then I said 2 and then I went to 3 and I realized that it's arranged differently. GS is talking about a friend who taunted a lion at a sanctuary? Oof. Because we can roll gnomes multiple times in this game, I think we should, and they say gnomes are familiar with the elements. They seem to be giving them sort of somewhat dwarf status, but there's also dwarves on here, so I don't know. But because they're somewhat familiar with the elements, why don't we theme them around an element? What element should the first gnomes we find be themed, keeping in mind that what we're looking for is Christmas decorations. Jumpstore says I have antisocial personality disorder. Less time I spend around people, less time I spend asking God, why must I exist? To be clear, I think you're probably joking, but if anybody doesn't know, antisocial means something very different in psychology. Antisocial means like you're comfortable with hurting other things or like whatever else. Doesn't mean you don't like being social. Earth crystal quartz ornaments. That's a good idea. Crystal, like clear. Yeah, like clear stones. Diamonds and crystals and quartz. Okay. What would attract our attention? Klaus knew the Fae were cautious folk, but also prone to parties. So he decided to take the steep switchback to a high ledge that could overlook the snowy forest valley. He thought maybe at a distance he would catch a vision of a fairy circle to direct his path through the woods. Oh, interesting, Jumpster. To direct his path through the woods. Uncle Kitty talking about a friend who smiled at a ape, unfortunately, is a sign of aggression with them, so it flipped out. Thought maybe at a distance he would catch a vision of a fairy circle to direct his path through the woods. But as it turned out, he didn't. Gia says, what time of day were you traveling? The evening, like sort of dusk. But as it turned out, he didn't need to climb far. Before he heard the hum and whistle of something odd in the rock walls. Odd in the rock wall along his path. He followed the murmuring echoes of the stone until he TS says Rory is inspired by his new setup. He has accomplished a lot of writing already. Indeed. Stone until he... followed the murmuring echoes of the stone. Behind the stone. That's been... until the notes became so clear, he knew an opening must be near. Why don't we rhyme? Why not? I just realized I never actually followed up on what happened with the computer. I had a laptop. It was my third laptop of the year, and it was borrowed from a friend. But like the previous laptop, but not the one previous to that, it was 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that. They were old ones. So the 11 to 12 year old ones, they I'm just saying that because they would be I need to explain that I'm not cursed. The thing that shouldn't have died was my first laptop. That was only like 3 or 4 years of use, and the motherboard cooked itself. Then the one I took out after that was the one from prior to me getting that one. So it was even older, and it was kind of holding together, but it, like, there was things I didn't mention in the stream, like if it just bumped a cord wrong, it would have shut off, so on and so forth. Anyways, neither here nor there. So my friend lent me another laptop, which I've been using for the last few months, and it was in really good I was in a really good sort of position with that one because it was pretty sturdy and new, and it hadn't been as used as my other one. But that's the thing about old laptops, you know, the thermal paste or something starts to weaken or dry out or crack off or whatever else, and then it starts just overheating a bit here and there, and eventually it blows a component. And what it ended up doing, it was still running, but the video card died. And unfortunately, an enormous amount of what I do requires a video card. Better than the onboard video card of a 12-year-old system that could barely display some websites. So I spent the weekend talking to some people, and some very kind friends of mine donated some parts. Also lent me a good deal of money. I mean, it's not like a top-of-the-line computer or anything, but for me, a good deal of money that I intend to pay back at some point. But the reason why I ended up with the parts that I did was kind of twofold. I'll just finish this thought and we'll go back to the story, because I know some people are surely curious. The two things that sort of made me decide to go the way that I did is, first of all, the difference between like budget parts and mid-range parts in computing is maybe like $100, maybe $2. If you wanted like a budget computer to a mid-range computer, you know, depending on what you count as a computer, it's not a huge jump. The difference between a mid-range computer and a high-end computer is like $4,000. So like there is this little gradient that becomes less and less. Jumpstore says, Ray has friends. I do have friends. I try not to bring them up. I've tried to actually deliberately reconnect with some friends of mine this year because I was getting a bit too antisocial and it wasn't good for me. The antisocial in the colloquial term. So I sort of went mid-range because it was a difference of, I think, like $150 between that and something that could do like less than half of what I got. And the other reason is, why did I go with a tower after talking about a laptop for so long? So, for example, my first computer that died, I looked at, it was a motherboard capacitor blew, and I was looking at how much it cost to replace the motherboard on it. It's like a 4 or 5 year old computer. And to get a replacement motherboard off of eBay was $900. And there was a chance I could get that down a bit. But that was like, at that point, it was like, why don't I just get another laptop? $900 is almost as much as this whole tower cost with the parts that my friends gave me and stuff like that. Yeah, so the tower. The other reason why I went with the tower is that the tower, to that point, allows you to replace with much more standardized parts. So like the most expensive thing in that tower is less than half the price of replacing one part on my laptop. So the reason why, Uncle Kitty says $900 for a motherboard, what the hell? Because that's the bespoke nature of laptop parts, right? Like it's just for that one laptop, versus using ATX standard laptops means that you're infinitely cheaper. Like my laptop is no slouch, and I think it was like $250 or something, like to give people a contrast if they don't know this stuff. So that's how I wound up. And if you are nerdy enough that you're curious, what did I actually end up with in the case? Non-nerds just, don't even need to focus on this. It's an RTX 4060, which is more powerful than I expected. I maybe could have done less with less, but I'm not complaining at this point. It was a good deal. It was a good week for my computer to die, because this is Boxing Week and everything is cheap with computer stuff. It's an RTX 4060, an AMD Ryzen 7 5500 series, I think. With, I forget its name, but it's like a cooler that's been around for ages. And it's an MSI motherboard. I forget what it's called. It's got the bomber truck on it or whatever. I forget what it's called. With Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Which is neat, because I don't think I've ever had a tower with Bluetooth before. So yeah, if you're into that kind of stuff. Other than that, it's just fans on a what's called a micro case. It's still not huge for people small. Jumpstore says, Rory, $900. Is there any other way I can get this motherboard? With a wink. Sales rep, well, I guess there is this one way. Shows a new computer. Yeah, when someone tells you that a part on your 4-year-old computer is going to cost as much as most of another computer, just buy another computer. Anyways, it does mean that if something dies on this computer, it is infinitely more simple for me to replace it. So yeah, there's the computer story. Uncle Kitty says, Jeepers, my new PC was $1,500 with warranty and an additional external HD. I got very lucky. My computer was much less than $1,500, especially US. was not even close to 1500 US for this tower. But that, like, I had a friend who gave me their power supply that they weren't using. I had a friend who gave me a second monitor that is one of the prettiest 1080p monitors I've ever seen. Apparently they might have stolen it from work, so that's why I got it. We pulled the hard drives out of the dead laptops. That's how we did the SSDs and all that. And I thought that was outrageously expensive. I guess that depends on what you got, Uncle Kitty. What did you get with it? Like, what's your specs? All right, there's the story on the computer. Let's go back to gnomes. The voices. Until I saw what it could do. Yeah, so I played a bit of Baldur's Gate 3, and I'm pretty impressed with what this thing can do. Because I don't have any real interest in 4K or anything like that. I feel like it's massive diminishing returns. Once I'm into a game, I don't notice that. Stable frame rates, good resolution, 1080p is fine with me. Witchery says acquired from work. Well, it's not my work, and I'm not naming them. So they work at a massive corporation, so I don't think they even care. The voices were nasal with a lilting pitch. Not gruff as dwarfs. So he bets they were gnomes. Oh, gnome folk. Klaus hollered in the melody of their song. Uncle Katie said gaming PCs are like bass boats or competition firearms. Hundreds of dollars in hundreds of extra or thousands of extra dollars to increase performance by 1 or 2%. Yeah, at some point, and I'm not criticizing it, it's basically just sort of an extension of that hot rod instinct of you want to build the best just because you see if you could, and you know, everyone has a hobby. You know, I don't have a problem with it, but for most people, top-end computers are just a complete waste. I find myself bare of glittering stone on my bright green tree. Is there something I could do so you could do for me? Trying to rhyme because I said he's singing along with the song. Now we flip the coin. See if we figure it out. Yeah. I think that's my view too. Like, my partner had a computer that a good deal of money was spent on, but of course, I mentioned before, they're animators and professional programs consume enormous amounts of resources in computers. But they spent a good deal of money on theirs 7 years ago, and it still runs everything fine. So I do feel like it's one of those things where, like, there's no point in breaking the bank. You know, don't feel like you're really going to be missing something. Like, a lot of the higher end RTX cards are just about if you want to run 4K ray tracing, and even then they don't do that very well. Once you get above, you know, 4060, if you're not doing 4K and you're not obsessed with ray tracing, because the 4060 will do that as well, then who cares? Don't. You know, like the difference between a 4060, which is, I think, I mean, I got it on sale, but I think its regular price is like $400 or 450 or something Canadian, whatever that is in American. But like, I think like the 4090 is something like a $2,000 card. Flipping this coin, seeing what they have for us. Oh, we got to do something for the gnomes. What do you guys want to do for the gnomes? Oh, one thing. Well, I put that out there. Jumpstore says, I'm a penny pincher. I guess that's the opposite of a pincher. Pitcher. And a lot of my friends joke about being Jewish and hating to spend money. Yeah. The most cheap, you know, stereotypical whatever Jew jokes that I ever heard were from my Jewish friends. But as far as I can tell, every culture has a certain culture of thriftiness. It just manifests differently. And the way that I saw it manifest among my Scottish relatives was they were really cheap about things that they probably shouldn't be, and then super wasteful about things that they probably should be. So, like, they would spend 10 cents on 200 terrible socks that they hated wearing and that dissolved after two wears. But then they would spend $175 on a bottle of scotch to drink one night alone, right? Like, it was that kind of cheap. Yeah. Uncle Kitty says the gnome wants us to convince their trash panda to move on. It's the size of a grown man. I like that one, Uncle Kitty. I have to negotiate with a raccoon who is maybe stealing their supplies. Is that a man of the man world? We hearing us? Replied an echo of small echo of a small choir. A small choir of small voices echoed out a small hole in the granite wall. He wants our quartz. For they were quartz gnomes. But we... Zombie Wolf, hello. good to see you. Hope your work is going well. He wants our quartz, for they were quartz gnomes. Zombie Wolf says, you know pandas were once cryptids. It did not. It wasn't until the 1800s when people realized they were actual animals. A small choir of small voices echoed out a small hole in the granite cliff. He wants our quartz, for they were quartz gnomes. But we need more than just a plea. We, the gnome folk, face a foe. Striped and pigging. Striped and portly. Foe who guards our food. So, it's a lame rhyme. So we cannot feed and are so hungry. Zombie Wolf says, thanks, Rory. Sadly, I'm working. Oh, that's such a bummer. Oh, I forgot to say it's American Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to my American friends. I think everybody knows this at this point, but if you don't know this, Canada does not do Thanksgiving on the same date at all. Our Thanksgiving is the first week of October, and it's barely celebrated. The new computer, I just gave the whole speech about it, so if you watch back the video, I won't redo that. But I will say now, has been excellent. It's my new best friend. Wish I could take it to bed. Just a hug. Just a cuddle. Close was no great. Oh, one thing that has happened is I have a friend who's going to get a deal for me on a Windows license. But in the meantime, it's not fully activated. And what I didn't know is they don't let you customize. That's what they lock you out of. And I was like, oh, whatever. Backgrounds do I ever need to activate? But what they locked me out of is the ability to change the theme. And the default theme is the light theme. And it's so hard on the eyes. I know not everybody is that way, but I need a dark theme. Zombie Wolf says, we are swamped in the bakery, and I'm like, who the F is getting pastries at this time? Well, forgetful folk. As much as we don't celebrate Thanksgiving up here, I do have an American friend, and this is the first year he's spending Thanksgiving in Canada, because he is eventually immigrating here. He's going through that process, and we are going to do some Thanksgiving adjacent stuff with him tomorrow. Uncle Kitty says there's a bakery open at this ungodly hour. I think Zombie Wolf's on the coast with me. I don't know if you are, Uncle Kitty, but it's 7:45 here. So I could see a bakery being open that late right now. Depending on where it is. Klaus was no great songsmith, but he knew how touchy the gnomes could get if he broke their melody, cadence, or breath. Zombie Wolf says I got to make creme brulee. Creme brulee is fun. I don't know that I prefer it to other kind of like cream pot versions of cream pot. I don't know that the textural contrast is my favorite thing. I don't dislike it, but it's not my personal favorite. But to make it is fun. cream puff, and of course so many freaking pumpkin pies. Uncle Kitty says it's almost 11 p.m. here. Oh, wow. Gennaro says, I believe Dunkin' is 24 hours. Well, Dunkin' is the American version of Tim Hortons. Or at least the closest equivalent. And a lot of Tim Hortons are 24 hours. I can see that. Klaus was no great songsmith, but he knew how touchy the gnomes could get if you broke their melody, cadence, or breath. So he tried his best. What guards your food, dear little gnomes? A foe, a friend, a beast that roams. I'm not really going to go through and check the cadence on all of these. That'll take way too long. Zombie Wolf says, by the way, we didn't have a torch for the creme brulee, so I had to use the broil setting. Yeah, I've had to do that too in a restaurant when I used to work in restaurants. And try not to burn the sugar. It's tough too, because depending on what you're using, whether it's an like an industrial oven or whether it's like a salamander or whatever, they can be really uneven. And so like the ones in the back might be burning when it's hard to tell at the angle, and it's so touchy. Also, they bring a bit more ambient heat, so I found sometimes, this depended on the recipe, but sometimes it made them a bit liquidy. Zombie Wolf says, I prefer flan myself, but I love how jiggly they both are. I do like their jiggle. I don't know if I've ever thought about it. I do like flan. I'll say that much. I like it when they have a jellied reduction of like fruit or something on top of them, which I guess is sort of what flan is, but it's not fruit. Yeah, and then you can pierce down in that sort of concentrated berry flavor or whatever mixes in with the cream. I like that. Gennaro says, it reminds me of how my grandfather was banned from making green bean casserole. So green bean casserole really isn't a thing in Canada. It is made at best as like ode to knowing that's an American tradition. So what makes a good one, and what was your grandfather doing wrong? Foe, a friend, a beast that roams. Tis striped. And round. With ears. This is lame. It's crowned. And our seeds. It's downed. He kept setting it to broil instead of bake, and it caught fire? Wow. Zombie Wolf in the wrong context. That quote could be horrible. When I see flan or creme brulee jiggle, it's like they're doing a little happy dance, and it makes me think, oh, how cute and soon to be delicious. Ooh, hot take from Uncle Kitty. There's no such thing as a good green bean casserole. I like green beans. I guess that depends on if you like green beans. You'll notice I like most food. It takes a lot for me to not like food. With ears, it's crowned, and our seeds, it's down in our winter store of seeds. Wail. The gnomes wailed. Klaus knew this to be a local raccoon. One so portly and slow, he rarely kept up with his group. With his... What's a pack of raccoons called? I'm sure there's a name for it. Zombie Wolf says, also, Rory, in my defense, I am a wolf. That is true. That is true. Janera says, I strongly disagree, Uncle Kitty. Oh, we're going to have food fights. It's my third favorite Thanksgiving food. Uncle Kitty said, all the ones I've tried are bitter. See, that's the thing about food, right? Like, different people have different sensitivities. That sort of chlorophyll bitterness, I just don't... It's not very strong to me. A gaze or a nursery? GS says, now I want B-Day Brulee. When's your B-Day, GS? I mean, you don't have to give me a year, but just a month will be fine. Nursery or a gaze? Klaus knew this to be the local raccoon. One so portly and slow, he rarely kept up with his nursery. Of waddling. Garbage tipping furballs. Klaus hadn't seen it for a bit. Uncle Kitty says, who comes up with the official names for groups of animals anyways? Bored biologists, I assume. Genera says, green beans, cream of mushroom soup, Parmesan cheese on top with French fried onions. Now, the onions are definitely the thing that I like the most. Jumpstore says, speaking of pudding, it seems I'm the only one who loves eating heated up chocolate pudding. It keeps its viscosity, or does that liquefy it? Like, that doesn't sound gross to me or anything. I just don't know if I would prefer it. Klaus hadn't seen it for a bit. He had assumed the worst. But now he knew. The lazy thing was thieving from the Fae. Jumpstore says it's a nostalgic thing. That makes sense. Yeah. I like Uncle Kitty's theory that it's just a group of drunken old men. Uncle Kitty said, I love cilantro, though. Again, yeah, that's a tongue thing. It's funny, one of my parents tastes soap. It has the soap thing when they eat cilantro, and one of my parents doesn't. And both me and my sister, rather than going one way or the other, seem to be able to taste it kind of both ways. But both of us have concluded that we still like the flavor enough that the soapiness doesn't turn us off. Uncle Kitty says, and Brussels sprouts. I love Brussels sprouts. I do like Brussels sprouts even just boiled, which is like the taboo thing to do with them. But actually my favorite recipe for Brussels sprouts has become baking them with thin sliced apples and bacon. Or whatever, if you're not person who eats bacon. There's plenty of other things you could use. You just need anything kind of salty and savory with a bit of fat to it. So there's vegan and kosher and so on ways you can approach it. But the sweetness cuts a bit of that bitterness for people who have a sensitivity to it, and then the fatty and saltness helps sort of almost bring a textural consistency to it that it lacks a little bit on its own. Yeah, Jump Store, that's not uncommon. That sort of, strong bitterness with cilantro, yeah. One of my parents is that way. You put a inch of it in there, and they'll be like, bleh, bleh, bleh. Genera has a chocolate pudding confession. My high school would always serve chocolate pudding on Taco Day. I was in a weird food experiment phase, and I tried putting pudding on the taco. It was actually pretty good. So chocolate in Mexican food is a thing, like mole sauce is a thing. So I can see that. But it's so sweet. That's what would make it tough. Yeah, Zombie Wolf points out that, you can get curries in Japan with chocolate in them. Like, chocolate as a savory ingredient is not insane. You can get chocolate on steak in the right restaurant, but, usually sort of on the bitter side. Oh, I didn't know that, Witchery. Witchery says that Brussels sprouts have been significantly modified in the last 20 years. And as a person in his 20s, let's all believe that. I definitely don't know of Brussels sprouts outside of that. I like super dark chocolate as well. Yeah, I'm not judging. I mean, eat what you like. Food is subjective. How is Klaus going to get rid of this lazy, overweight raccoon away from the gnome's food? In a way that is interesting. Yeah, that's the thing, Jump Store, is like whenever I have things where it's sort of alternatives, as a person with celiac disease, like you get a lot of alternatives. And it's like, it's always like they succeed in one aspect and then not in others. So like a lot of gluten-free stuff these days, texturally is actually pretty similar. Good, I would even say. Not great. It's never great, but good. but the flavor's not there. Wheat actually has a flavor. If you eat it all the time, you don't notice it, but when you don't have it, you really do. It never tastes like wheat. But then if sometimes it tastes like wheat, the texture's wrong. Like, there's always just something that's off. But I'm not opposed to the idea of a chickpea mousse. I like chickpeas. All right. I've had really fine quality white chocolate before Genera, and it was good. Because what white chocolate is supposed to be anyways is supposed to be cocoa butter without the cocoa. Right, so chocolate is made of cocoa butter and cocoa powder and, you know, other things like sugar and whatever else, or milk or cream or whatever. But white chocolate is supposed to be just basically the cocoa butter and no cocoa powder. But is it usually that? No. Usually it's basically just a candle with vanilla in it. But if you have the stuff where it's like properly creamy cocoa butter, it's not bad. I don't know that I prefer it, but it's not bad. But now he knew the lazy thing was the... Close was led by the chattering songs of the unseen gnomish choir to a small cavern where sat a snoring Jumpstore says, bitter is my most hated flavor. I have a major sweet tooth, so I only eat either milk or white chocolate. Maybe ruby. I've had ruby chocolate. I don't know what it is. What is it? But I also prefer something fancier than Hershey's. I mean, I think we could all agree that Hershey's is not very good chocolate. I mean, if it's all that's around, I'm not going to say no, but yeah. Daenerys says, adopt the raccoon. Oh, that's an interesting idea. He has those fake chocolate coins in his pack. Well, you can't give chocolate to a raccoon, right? I suspect that would be poisonous to him. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm taking dog logic. It's not really coming through on the stream, but one of the advantages to my new computer is that behind my head here, you can kind of see there's a light. It's a light a friend gave me years ago. There's two of them that go on either side of your TV, and they're designed to read the edge color of the monitor they're put around and then display that color out as it changes and whatever on the walls to sort of feel like your TV is glowing or whatever. But it required a hook up to a computer, and I never hooked my TV up to a computer, so it didn't really ever work. But this computer is permanently hooked up to my TV, and as a result, it is imitating the edge of the screen right now. Uncle Kitty says spray the raccoon with a water bottle and says bad. I know my crowd. If I write a story where we're spraying a raccoon, I would have walkouts. Close was led by the chattering songs of the unseen gnomish choir to a small cavern where sat a snoring. Where sat a snoring ball of thick fur. whose long, bushy tail. For those who are into Christmas, which I know isn't not everybody, whether by culture or just because they don't like it, but for those into Christmas, what's your sort of like beginning of Christmas movie or TV show that you watch? Candy canes. I like candy canes. Or sat a snowing barrel of thick fur, whose long bushy tail lay across the pile of seeds. Tree nuts. And other gnomey snacks. Zombie Wolf says, I found out that Leonardo da Vinci can see other colors other people can't. I certainly believe that. The color spectrum is so weird. I learned the other day that the mantis shrimp can see colors that no other creature can see. They can also punch really hard, but I knew that part of them. Witchery says, I don't think I have one. I do have an entire Christmas media folder, though. For me, mine stretched back to being a kid of the 90s, but it's The Simpsons Christmas specials up to a certain season, of which there are quite a few less than you would expect. Because they started on one, and so iconically in your mind, you think they must have done one nearly every year like they did with Halloween. But actually, they did that first one, and then 7 seasons later, they did another one. GS says, I want to sell candies called Nomi Snacks. Yeah, that's me being cute. I know that's not really a word. Hey there, Mr. Raccoon. That food's for the Fae, not for you. Today is the day before I shall fill my garbage cans with turkey bones and stale scones. I don't know why I'm still rhyming. He's not talking to gnomes. Why don't you leave alone these snacks for the gnomes and come to my home? Getting into some slant rhymes here. Oh yeah, we have to find the word in a square of color, and the word was always a shade slightly off the background. I was the only one who could see the words after a while. Yeah, there's a couple of trends. I'll say trends because none of them are black and white issues. No pun intended. But for example, men in general see less colors than women, but not always. So if you're like getting your back up or whatever, there's lots of exceptions to that. That's just sort of the trend. And yeah, and some places color was more important to the eye than others, and so if that's your history, you know, where your people were selectively bred basically, then that can have an impact too. Eyes are really fascinating in that way. I have surprisingly good color vision, I will say that. I've done those tests where you need to put the colors in order from their hues as they darken. And I always do surprisingly well on those. Why don't you leave alone these snacks for the gnomes and come to my home where you'll be... I'm at the end of the rhyme and I can't think of anything else that rhymes. Yeah, that's true, witchery, yeah. No monitor really has a true color band. As is noticeable, because I have one computer here that when a company I was working at shut down and was sold out and they were giving away all their stuff, I took this one. And it's terrible, but it's lasted. It's not terrible, but like color-wise, it's really bad. And then I have this one that I was given... that's like deep and rich, and their interpretation of black is like 10 shades off. Find a phone. Oh, good idea. Phone, tomes, bone, twice, tomes. I think there was a thing, a bunch of messages came twice. Good point. I'd also sent GS's twice, I think. Maybe not. That usually just means that there was a delay and it whatever. Doesn't matter. It's just YouTube being garbage. Why don't you leave alone these snacks for the gnomes and come to my home where you'll... be daily fed. This is some of that real BS. Twisting a sentence for a rhyme. You'll be daily fed a marrow bone. Phloem, says GS, a river. That's not a word I knew. I learned a word today. Oh, I meant to ask, Jumpstore, if you put to practice any of that horror writing that you learned as a tutorial? Oh, I missed your message, Witchery. It said, I always watch Klaus, though, since it came out. I've missed it maybe 1 year, but I usually watch it, yeah. The raccoon took a bit more wooing. And Klaus had debated out with a biscuit. But soon he had a feral friend that accepted his offer of daily garbage. Jumpstore says, I have a worry. I think it's coming along pretty nicely. I'm worried about the ending. I don't want to pull a Stephen King. I'm going to use the, I forget his name. He's an author, but not because he's not a famous author, but because I'm terrible with name recall, but who said second drafts are where you pretend you intended an ending all along. don't worry about your endings when you're still going through a draft. Just get it out, and if it's super corny or stupid or whatever else, or Stephen King-y, that's okay. It's easier to think about stuff like that, big structural changes and stuff, once it's all on paper. Soon he had a feral friend that accepted his offer of daily garbage. The gnomes rejoiced in glorious song and threw at his feet a fine selection of glittering stones. Zombie Wolf says, it keeps sending my chat twice. I noticed that. That's fine, because my break is over anyways. This was fun. Can't wait to see how the stream ends later. I think I'm about at the end now. It was good to have you here, Zombie Wolf. Good luck with the bakery tonight. Genera says, I've only read one King book. His writing style is not for me. He's not my favorite either. I have respect for him as a writer, but it isn't like what I reach for. But I think a lot of what I like is... how do I put this? It's not that I'm like edgy and off the beaten trail. I just think if you are the kind of person... I think I've said it this way before. I had a friend who used to put in flooring. And when you would walk into a building, let's say it was like some beautiful building with a nice tile floor, you'd be like, wow, this building is beautiful. And immediately he'd be like, oh, they didn't level that tile and whatever else. Like, he had the eyes for it, right? Because that was his life's work. For that reason, I find that I have a different threshold for things I'll tolerate in writing and whatever. Some of it's way more generous than maybe it even should be. I give a lot of generosity for originality, right? And some of it is just really thin. Right? Like, I just have no patience. But I'm always cautious to share opinions because my goal is that people read what they enjoy, not what they think is going to gain my approval. So, but the one thing I don't mind saying is, it's fine if you like it, but holy God, did I hate the Da Vinci Code and do not understand the appeal of it. I've already said that on this channel, so it's nothing new. I'm going to let people like things. That's my motto. But if you want to know an example of something, because I'm sure people are curious, that I vocally disliked, that was one. And I'm not inviting like a big pile on because it's a popular book or whatever else. But there you go. Store doesn't like Stephen King's sex scenes. Man, I didn't even realize he had them. It just shows how little I've read of him. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's kind of hard to do. I think probably the place where I was most surprised at how, like, effective it was. Just as a sex scene, but also as, I mean, a sex scene is a bit of an exaggeration, but as, like, a scene of romance. I guess they have sex. It's not very explicit, though. The one in 1984. Orwell's 1984. It was Misery. It'd be weird if Misery had one. That would put a real different spin on that story. Witchery says there's an incredibly dubious one in It, but I think he was high at the time. That's a fair assumption from that era. Yeah. And that's probably true. I think if somebody tells you I was high and it was a mistake when I was high, he's probably right. There are definitely stories I've read from Stephen King. I haven't read a lot of his stuff, but some of his short stories in the sort of, I guess, early 80s or whatever, when he was supposedly really heavily into drugs, where it felt like a man trying to get some money. The gnomes rejoicing, and then threw at Klaus's feet a fine selection of glittering stones that would catch well the light of candles on his green tree. Klaus gave a bow and thanked them, then carried on to find himself some garland. There was one in The Shining? Did I read The Shining then? Maybe I didn't. I thought I did, but now I'm starting to think I didn't. There's one in Doctor Sleep. I don't know anything about that book. I don't even know it existed until I just read it. It's such a Stephen King name, though. Witchery says, yeah, that we should blame publishers are meant to edit things. Yeah, I mean, I've said before that 40% of any book, at least, is the editor. Authors get way too much credit. And the average reader underestimates just how much an editor is involved in the final product of a book. They do way more on a structural level. They don't just edit sentences. But I mean, you usually, especially if you're a famous author, you get a lot of veto power. You can see that in some authors too. Like, they start with these concise, readable books. Young adult authors are notorious for this. They start with these books that make sense for kids that age. And then when they get really famous, if they're one of the ones who get famous by like the 4th or 5th book, it's like 7 times the size, and it's not better for it. Jumpstore says that when a terrible book gets published, I think an editor must have gotten fired for this. I guess it depends on how it does, right? Like, their job is to find things that have a market, right? Not the best there is. In fact, a lot of books that we would consider classics barely sold in their time. Well, they don't pay editors anymore, Witchery, so yeah, probably. All right. Ugh. Jesus. I'm not reading that. But yeah, you know I saw it. All right. Let's read back what we got. We're talking about Colleen Hoover. I honestly don't know anything about her other than I've seen her on shelves in like gift stores at airports. If you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to know what we came up with. And what we came up with was a part of this micro RPG called the Good Christmas Tree. A micro RPG is when you have basically a business card sized rules. It's sort of like a challenge that game creators will do. But in this case, all you needed for it was a D6. I don't know where my D6 went. There it is. Fell on the floor. You need a D6, and you need a coin to flip. I used my Metroid coin. Basically what you do is you are framed as a person who's looking for decorations for their Christmas tree, and you've decided to collect it from the creatures of the forest, including some fae folk. So we rolled a D6 to figure out who we collected from, which was the gnomes. We only got through one roll of it. I was a little chatty tonight. And then what you do is you flip your coin to find out if they have it, or if they're just going to give it to us, or if they need us to do something first. And as far as how ours went, well, we'll find out together. So I'm going to read back to you the little story we came up with it, with a mixture of suggestions from the chat and my own thoughts and the prompts of the game. The dusk turned the snow blue, at least to Klaus's eyes. It was a mournful color for such a happy scene. It was Christmas Eve, and tomorrow, if the weather stayed reasonable, children would be shuttled up to his cabin door for celebrations of the day. However, the blue of the dusky snow was not entirely inappropriate, the dusk snow rather, for in his flurry of preparation, hunting, splitting logs, and much else, Klaus had forgotten to buy decorations for the cabin. Most importantly, he had a fine plump pine tree standing bare in the center of his living room. What sort of Christmas morning, he thought to himself, involves opening gifts under an undecorated tree? Yet, it was late. There were no stores open. Not anymore. Klaus was ready to surrender to his own mistake and call it a night. But then he remembered a thing his old Nan told him. None know whimsy like the good folk of the forest. It was a peculiar event for him to catch any of the fae folks out and about, but on that day, so close to the solstice, the walls between things were often thin. He figured there would be no great loss to him but the time to wander out into the evening snow. And maybe he could try to petition those fae folk for the decorations on his dull tree. So he bound himself up into sheepskin and wool, then tread a trail through the knee-high drift that was building against his door. Klaus knew the fae were cautious folk, but also prone to parties, so he decided to take the steep switchback out back his house to a high ledge that could overlook the snowy forest valley. He thought maybe at a distance he could catch a vision of a fairy circle to direct his path through the woods, but as it turned out he didn't need to climb that far, for he heard before him the hum and whistle of something odd in the rock wall along his path. He followed the murmuring echoes behind the stone until the notes became so clear he knew an opening must be near. The voices were nasal with lilting pitch, not gruff as dwarves, so he bet they were gnomes. "O gnome folk," Klaus hollered in the melody of their song, "I find myself bare of glittering stone on my bright green tree. Is there something I could do so you could do for me?" "Is that a man of the man world we hear hearing us?" A small choir of small voices echoed out the small hole in the granite cliff. "He wants our quartz," for they were quartz gnomes. "But we need more than just a plea. We, the gnome folk, face a foe who guards our food so we cannot feed and are so hungry." Klaus was no great songsmith, but he knew how touchy the gnomes could get if you broke their melody, cadence, or breath. So he tried his best. "What guards your food, dear little gnomes? A foe, a friend, a beast that roams?" "'Tis striped and round, with ears it's crowned, and our winter store of seeds it has downed," the gnomes wailed. Klaus knew this to be the local raccoon, one so portly and slow he rarely kept up with his fellow nursery of waddling, garbage-tipping furballs. Klaus hadn't seen the roly-poly boy for a bit, so he had assumed the worst. But now he knew the lazy thing was thieving from the Fae. Klaus was led by the chattering songs of the unseen gnomish choir along that granite wall to a small cavern where sat a snoring bull of thick fur whose long bushy tail lay across the pile of seeds, tree nuts, and other gnomey snacks. Hey there, Mr. Raccoon. That food is for the Fae, not for you. Today is the day before I shall fill my garbage cans with the turkey bones and stale scones. Why don't you leave alone these snacks for the gnomes and come home to my home where you'll be daily fed a marrow bone? And the raccoon took a bit more wooing, and Klaus had to bait it with a biscuit, but soon he had a feral friend that accepted his offer of daily garbage. The gnomes rejoiced in glorious song, then threw at Klaus's feet a fine selection of glittering stones that would catch well the light of candles placed on the boughs of his green tree, alone and naked in his living room. Klaus gave a bow and thanked them, then carried on to find himself some garland. Boy, there's some real hate for Colleen Weaver here. Let's let people like things. I mean, I'm sure somebody likes it. But thanks for warding me away, I guess. Colleen Hoover. Yeah. I think the thing, without naming any names here on authors, something that really is off-putting to me is too much vanity. Like, I guess because I'm a writer, I really hate it when I can see that a character is a self-insert. I think I probably minded it less when I was a kid, and it obviously is a trope for good reason in, like, young adult, but that was something that stood out for me with the Da Vinci Code. I was like, oh, this is just some dude's fantasy about himself being super cool. And I guess I just couldn't get past that. Jess says, love your rhymes, Rory. No rhythm, though. Real weird cadence. But thank you. All right. Well, the computer hummed along in good form. And didn't give us any trouble. And I eventually got used to the swapping of the monitors. But I gotta say, I did not expect that to screw me up as much as it did. It was like trying to find something in the mirror, right? Like if your movements are mirrored and you're trying to find something on your face. I don't know, it was surprisingly discombobulating. GS says, I like your charming story. I could place myself in it. Thank you. Jumpstore says, I've had my fan fiction phase. I mean, some of us didn't grow out of it. I think you could argue all of us authors are kind of writing fan fiction. All right. Well, before we all pile on books we don't like, which isn't what I like to do, let's wrap the show. I am obviously quite happy that I don't have the stress of, is this laptop going to die while I do these streams? Hopefully that came across. Thank you everybody who's been patient, because obviously this month has been really spotty on the schedule. If nothing else, I've eliminated a lot of days worth of Christmas storytelling, so there aren't a lot of Christmas stories in folklore to tell, surprisingly. Because the solstice, or whatever you want to call it, Christmas or the solstice or whatever, is particular to the folklore cycle, is just one of those things that was regarded very differently than we do now. But with that said, Jumpstore says, I was really looking forward to seeing crystal quartz ornaments. Sure. Good chance for fan fiction. The story certainly has room for it. It's not a complicated game to play. You're welcome to carry it on. But anyways, yeah. If you're out there, or if you're watching this later, I hope you start to feel better. I'm sorry for all your surgeries. I'm glad they're done. I hope your healing is quick. It was really good to see Zombie Wolf and Witchery in the chat this week. That was really lovely. And Genera. And of course, it's good to see everyone, but just people I haven't seen regularly in the chat lately. It was really lovely to see you folks. And of course, to everybody though, GS Uncle Kitty, also great to have you back, Uncle Kitty. GW says, like adjusting to a new car. You're correct. Yes. And GW, thanks for dropping in on the chat. Uncle Kitty says, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Yeah, to my Americans, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you get a lot of food. And good luck with your new PC, Rory. Yeah, I'm going to go play some games. Make your own ornaments with blackjack and Christmas hooks. All right. I'm sorry if I forgot anybody in my greetings, but nonetheless, as per usual, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Take a saunter to the door and get out of my shop.
Finns det några snälla barn här?